Hey, what's up, DS3TV? I can see you haven't subscribed to the channel. It's kind of weird. You should subscribe. I mean, you know, we got some good content here. And also, go to the Twitch that's in the link down in the description. Link is probably right here under me. And yeah, should do all of that. And yeah, please subscribe. Get to see me have hot sauce that I don't really want to have when we get to 10,000. So subscribe. What is up, DS3TV? We are back for another video. Also, before I get into this one, do want to, kind of tell you that I have a Patreon now. It's going to be a link in the description down below, and yeah, you can get the videos that's going to be coming out the next day. They're going to be there, and I have different tiers. One is $5, one is $8, and then one is, I believe it's 10 or 15 or something like that. But yeah. You obviously don't have to do it, but it helps me out, it helps me make good content, and yeah, I have it, for you guys, and also I can react to videos that would get me copyright claimed on my YouTube channel. I can react to those videos, and I can do Patreon exclusive videos too, so yeah, that'll be something that'll be in there, and that you can request. And yeah, so check that out in the description below. Click that little arrow down if you want to check that out, and I'll probably have it in the comment section too. Just post it there too. So yeah, this one's by let me actually see who is this one by, because this is a new one. So it's by Misali, and yeah, so this one's called Defense of the Imperial Measurement System. So this one's going to be about the freedom system, But yeah, let's see if the defense of the system. But yeah, let's get to it. Play.
The metric system is great. It's well designed, and it's good that it's an international standard. It's also, clearly and obviously better than the imperial measurement system, for reasons that have been thoroughly discussed by countless others before me. It's very silly that the United States hasn't fully...
Isn't it funny that, if memory serves me right, I think, wasn't the U.S. supposed to, the U.S. was supposed to use the metric system, or something like that, but, I think, when Thomas Jefferson sent the story I've always been told was when they were sending over the measurements, it didn't for some reason it got lost, and that's the reason why we never use a metric system. I don't know.
Adapted the metric system yet, since making the switch would have a large number of very clear advantages. I want to make this as unambiguous as possible. The metric system is better than the imperial system, and I will at no point be arguing otherwise. However, I don't think the imperial measurement system is as bad as people make it out.
And also,
in the discussion surrounding
that says they use the metric system is using the full metric system. Most places still use imperial measurements, like Canada. They don't say, oh yeah, I'm 1.75 meters tall or whatever, right? They say, yeah, I'm 5'6" or something like that. I'm 5'6", or whatever, or 5'7" feet. You know what I'm talking about. So.
Surrounding the competing systems of measurement, I think there's a lot of nuance that's been lost. So, hi, I'm Misali, and this is a defense
is Misali. Okay, I didn't even know how to say it. Sorry about that.
The imperial measurement system. Before I begin, I should clarify some terminology. The imperial measurement system is not, in fact, one single system of measurement. It is a family of slightly different systems with a common origin. For the most part, I will be throughout this video referring to the set of imperial units that I am most familiar with, the United States customary units, and I'll try to make it clear whenever I'm talking about things from the other imperial systems. Also, metric system is itself a slightly ambiguous term, but it doesn't matter, and you all know exactly what I'm talking about. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the chart. This is a diagram of English units of length that appears on a few different Wikipedia.
This is interesting. I mean, yeah, I could see most of these, yeah. Yeah, this is a interesting way to look at the like measurement system.
Media articles. It's somewhat commonly used to show how complicated and arbitrary the imperial units are. I have a complicated relationship with the chart. While I think the chart is very useful and informative, and it does a great job showing the relationships between different English units of length, the way it's presented is a little misleading. If someone is familiar with the metric system, where all units of length, and indeed all units, are defined by each other with easy to remember powers of 10, a chart like this feels comically complicated by comparison. But the thing is, this isn't in fact one single set of units. Like, okay, Ramsden's chain is referring to a unit that was an alternative to Gunter's chain proposed in the late 18th century, sometimes called an engineer's chain. It saw some use, but it was never at any point a standard part of any imperial measurement system. A Roman mile, listed as being equal to exactly 50 Ramsden's chains, is just a completely unrelated unit from a completely different system.
Yeah, because I have
as
no
the name
idea what a
implies,
Roman mile is.
it's a Roman unit. It has no relation to Ramsden's chain or any of the other units on the chart. It seriously just shouldn't be here at all. Another rather suspicious thing about this chart is the nautical...
I don't know how much is a league, but I have heard of a league. In a nautical mile, that's... Isn't that the same as a mile? He's gonna go over it.
Mile, defined as either 60, 80 feet or 10 cables. And like, if a cable is 100 fathoms and a fathom is 2 yards and a yard is 3 feet, you don't have to be a professional mathematics communicator to notice that something doesn't add up here. Or I guess multiply, as the case may be. By the way, that unit there that's half a foot, that's called a shaftment. There's an F in there, no S on the end. Shaftment. It fell out of use in the 15th century, and that's something I should reiterate. Most units shown here are not used at all in the modern English.
Most of these aren't used, it seems like, right?
The chart is meant to show the relationships between various historic English units of length,
Twip.
and it does not...
What is a twip? I wonder.
in any way represent the system itself as it exists today, or indeed how it existed at any particular time or place. That's why this looks like a random jumble of arbitrarily defined units that don't fit together in any sort of internally consistent system that anyone would ever want to use. Because it literally is that. And the thing is, if you want to make fun of imperial units in their modern form for being unnecessarily complex, you can easily do that without needing to pretend that barleycorns or poppy seeds are still part of it. Like, if you wanted to, you could go through Appendix C of the Handbook of the United States National Institute of Standards and Technology, which thoroughly defines the complete set of US customary units, and also helpfully explains to what extent and in what context these units are used in modern times. You could use that information to generate this new version of the chart, showing every unit of length defined by the NIST Handbook as part of the customary units. By the way, every ratio shown here is exact. Like, a point is defined as exactly 0.013837 of an inch, which is close to 1/72th of an inch, as the Wikipedia chart suggests, but not exactly. Now, you might hear that and say, what? Why would you do that? That's such an arbitrary number. How is anyone expected to remember that? And the thing is, metric user, we don't. This is not a unit anyone uses for measuring things. It is used in exactly one context, and it's one that you might even already be familiar with, even if you've never used feet or inches before. A point is a typographic unit. It is literally only used when describing the size of text, as in a 12-point font. And that leads me to my first major point I want to make. This is the set of US customary...
It's a lot of, like, it's kind of weird, too, because, certain things we don't really use in anything, or certain things that you just kind of know because, like, and I feel like that's the same way with, like with meter, too, right? Like, if you've never used, like meters, like, for a lot of things, you're probably not gonna know, like, how far a meter is unless you have a meter stick, right? Like, without, like, actually looking it up or something like that. Like, just like the everyday person probably wouldn't. But, most people that use meters probably, well, actually, they might not know what a yard is. Because you're not, it's the same word, like, as you can see, it's the same word, but it's the same length, but it's just different words. So, I don't know. It's a lot of, like, different ones that you can see here that, like, kind of are similar, it looks like.
Units of length, but it is still not one single system of units. For starters, there's the metric units over there. Now, these metric units are part of the standard US customary.
I literally got off of work maybe like 2-3 hours ago, so Forgive me if I'm not making any sense.
System. Technically, they're given definitions right alongside the rest of the units here. But also, like, they're clearly not part of the same system. Like, an inch is defined as exactly 2.54 centimeters, but that's just a convention that was put into place to keep these two systems that coexist in sync with each other, so you can convert between them in a way that's nice and consistent. And even if you don't already know the history behind these units, you can tell that that's the case because, like, 2.54 centimeters is such a random number. Nobody would choose to define a new unit from the ground up to be exactly 2.54 of another existing unit. No, obviously not. This is clearly a definition that was chosen because the new standard was put into place and they wanted to redefine their legacy units in terms of this new standard. It's the same reason why a point is an awkward subdivision of an inch. It's the same reason why a nautical mile is defined as exactly 1852 meters. And guess what? It's also the same reason why a mile is 5280 feet. Yes,
I have
that's
no
right.
idea why
The reason
I can remember that a mile is 5280 feet. I have no idea why, but that's like always something like I know. Like if somebody asks me, I could just immediately remember it. I don't know. It was just like a very easy number to remember for me.
a mile is 5280 feet is because a mile and a foot are units from two completely different systems, and at one point, one was redefined in terms of the other. And like, yeah, you're right, it is an inconvenient conversion factor to deal with. It would be ridiculous for someone to make the decision to build a system of measurement from the ground up where one unit is defined as 5,280 of another smaller unit. That would be a really silly idea. But for some reason, whenever people who don't use imperial units make fun of this, and to be clear, this is a sensible thing to make fun of, they never take the extra step and try to think of why it would be that way, or what the implications of it are. Everyone just assumes that, yeah, someone had the idea that a mile should be 5280 feet, and whoever came up with that idea was being very silly. So, one, as I've already said, the reason there are 5280 feet in a mile instead of some more convenient number is that these units are not from the same system. The mile is from the Roman system of measurement. It's the Roman mile we saw before. It was defined as 1,000 paces, or 5,000 feet. But a foot in the Roman system was not the same unit as a foot in the English system, so using a Roman mile alongside English units meant that the number of feet in a mile would no longer be a nice round number. And okay, two, yeah, this is kinda silly and inconvenient to deal with. It's a pain to convert between feet and miles. But hey, guess what? We don't. These units are originally from different systems, and in the way they're used today, we treat them accordingly. Americans straight up do not convert between feet and miles. These two units are practically never used together. They are just two different units we have. And I want to emphasize that, like, a lot of people seem to think that this is a significant problem. And don't get me wrong, it is a little bit of a problem. It would be more convenient if all of our units of length belong to the same system. That's like one of the main reasons it would be good if the United States switched to metric. However, I think this problem has been overstated by people who aren't familiar with the imperial units, who tend to assume that yards and feet are commonly used as subdivisions of miles. Like, I don't know, you might assume that someone would say the distance from New York to Chicago is 737 miles and 4,400 feet.
Like, you would only use miles. You're never going to use feet. But that just isn't something that somebody would use, right? So that's why, like, it would never be a legitimate problem in a place that uses imperial, because that's just not how, like, those are two separate units of measurement, so you just wouldn't do that.
Feet. But like, no, we just say 737.84 miles if you want to use that level of precision. And yeah, it would be more convenient if all our units of length were related to each other in nice, easy to remember ways. But presenting the awkward relationship between these multiple systems that coexist as though it were a problem with the design of one single system that encompasses all of them is just incorrect. We convert between feet and miles about as often as we convert between miles and kilometers. Oh, right, I also want to point out another weird relationship you can see on this chart, the 0.999998 factor between feet and survey feet, and between miles and statute miles. You might reasonably ask what the deal is with those, so let's talk about them. This is a quirk unique to the US customary system. Most other versions of the imperial units don't do this. In the 1890s, the relationship between the US customary units and the metric system was defined by declaring that 1 meter is exactly 39.37 inches, effectively defining the metric system in terms of the imperial system, even though the meter was the one that had an actual formal definition. Then, in the late 50s, the imperial units were all officially redefined in terms of the metric system, with new definitions that all the English-speaking parts of the world that still used imperial units all agreed on, now saying that a foot is exactly 30.48 centimeters. However, the new foot was just slightly shorter than the value of the foot which had been used in the US up until that point. I'm talking like less than a micrometer shorter. This difference did not matter to anyone, well, except for surveyors, who had been using the barely longer foot to measure things to an extremely high level precision. So now there's two different feet in use in the United States, one that's only used by surveyors and another used by everyone else. This creates a divide between survey units and the rest of the US customary system, which, you might be able to tell, is very silly and causes problems. And because of this, starting in 2023, the survey units are all going to be redefined to get them back in sync with the rest of the length units.
So next year. That's going to be kind of crazy.
Redrawing this chart to look like this instead. So finally, the American furlong will be precisely the same length as the British furlong, and all will be right in the world. Now, okay, if we look back at the version of these units as they are currently defined in the United States, I would argue that showing all of these exact relationships, while useful, can still be misleading, right? Because, like the Wikipedia chart, it implies that this is one single system where a yard is a subdivision of a mile, and a meter is a subdivision of a nautical mile, and all that stuff. So if you just remove all of the numbers that are inconvenient conversion factors, you get what I think is a more useful way to think of these units. It's not one system, it's like 4 different systems with a few disconnected units that are just also here. And once the survey foot and statute mile are out of the picture, those will be merged together into just 3 systems with only 2 disconnected units. You have the metric system, the foot set of units, and the mile set of units. And of course now we've lost a lot of the connections, so the way these are organized is a little too complicated to read, so we can rearrange this a little bit to get something like this instead. I think this way of looking at it makes what I'm talking about much more clear, even though
is 3 miles. Okay. So that answers my question from earlier. Yeah. Because, I just didn't know what a league, like, how far a league was. I know, like, I've heard of it, I just didn't know how far it was.
So yes, individually these systems are still less elegant than metric, and it would be more convenient if we only used one system for everything instead of mixing these together. Treating them all like they are one single system makes it look more complex than it really is. And also, for the record, most of these units aren't actually used, like, ever. Length is measured in feet and inches, sometimes yard, and distance is pretty much always measured in miles. The rest of the units here, besides the metric ones, are things that most people...
Okay.
People straight up never need to deal with. Ask an American what a furlong is, and 9 times out of 10 you won't get an answer. Of course,
I heard of a furlong, but I don't know what it is.
Imperial units, metric units were all designed to work together as a system. Like the main unit of volume, the liter, is exactly 1 cubic decimeter. Compare that to US customary, where the units of length and volume are just completely disconnected. A gallon is 231 cubic inches, and I have literally never been expected to know that. I had to memorize for school that a mile is 5280 feet, even though that's not something I use in my everyday life.
I memorized that for school, but you're not gonna remember to convert everything. Because you don't really need to convert a lot of things when it comes to everyday life. You don't really need to convert a lot of things. But for school, you memorize how to convert certain things into certain things that I probably wouldn't have remembered anyway. 52 to 80 feet. I wouldn't remember that if I wouldn't have had to memorize it in school
at all, but before making this video, I literally was unaware that a gallon is equal to an integer number of cubic inches. And this is, again, because the imperial units aren't really one single system. These units were never designed to work together, so of course it's awkward to try to use them together. My point here isn't that this needless complexity is, a good thing. It's mainly that the amount of complexity implied by things like that one Wikipedia chart is not reflective of the way imperial units are actually used. Learning to use the imperial measurement system does not involve learning dozens of rare units and all of their conversion factors. Yes, it is pretty complicated, especially when compared to a more practical measurement system, but it's not this complicated. Another strangely common thing for people to make fun of is how calling a unit a foot sounds kinda silly. Oh, how antiquated they sound, measuring things with their feet. So, hot take, units having silly names is a good thing, actually. There is literally no downside. And okay, everyone already knows the reason why it's called a foot, right? In ancient times, the normal way to measure things was using actual parts of your body. Anthropometric is the fancy word for it. But as technology progressed and it became important for units to have consistent values, standard formalized definitions were made for the anthropometric units people were already casually using. So sure, why not just keep calling it a foot? The only real problem with doing that is since there were a lot of competing standards back in history times, it was pretty confusing figuring out exactly which foot you were referring to, and now people aren't sure if Napoleon was 5'2" or 5'7". However, we're currently living in present times, not the past, so that's not a problem anymore. So now if something is measured in feet, you can be confident that the foot being referred to is 30.5 centimeters. And I gotta say, a unit that's about 30 centimeters really comes in handy. It's a conveniently sized unit, and that's directly because of its anthropometric origin. It's definitely larger than an average actual human foot, but it's still, by design, at a scale that works great for measuring human-sized things.
Actually is.
And the metric...
To be honest, because even if somebody else forgets, you're okay, yeah, 30 centimeters is in a foot, so then you can kind of convert it like that in your head. Usually, that's how most people do it. in America, but yeah.
Metric system, as nice as it is, doesn't really have anything that's quite at that scale. A meter is about 3 times bigger and a decimeter is about 3 times smaller. Like, it's fine, it still works, but the foot was defined with measuring person-sized things in mind, and I think you can feel the difference. And that brings me to another very common argument people make against imperial units in general. As the argument goes, imperial units were all created by standardizing these weird arbitrary historical units, whereas metric units, from the ground up, were designed to be far more objective. A meter was originally 1/10,000,000th the distance from the equator to the North Pole. A kilogram was defined as the mass of a liter of water, stuff like that. And now they're even more objective, because today all the metric units are defined using universal constants. The thing is, the imperial units are defined using metric. A foot is exactly 30.48 centimeters. A pound is exactly 453.59237 grams. All of the advantages that metric gains from being defined using universal constants apply just as well to imperial units. Now you might say, why does that matter? Anyone who says that imperial units aren't objective enough is talking about their original definitions, not their current definitions. And you're right, it is completely arbitrary to define a unit to be equal to the mass of 7,000 grains of barley. There is no objective reason to do that. And also, there are so many factors that could result in major fluctuations in exactly how much that mass is, right? Like, it's so unreasonable to expect a definition like that to actually result in a consistent unit. Now, compare that to the original definition of a kilogram, which is the mass of 1 liter of water. I don't think I need to spell this out, but I'll do it anyway. This is also completely arbitrary. Sure, it might sound less arbitrary, but like, what's the actual objective difference? Is water a more objective substance than barley? Just like grains of barley, the mass of a liter of water isn't actually constant, and it can fluctuate due to any number of factors. And sure, the definition of a kilogram was later adjusted to account for these factors, and then it was defined as the mass of one specific physical object, and eventually it was redefined in terms of the Planck constant.
But like, constant since I was like in high school. This is a lot.
The pound was also defined to be the mass of one specific physical object, and then it was defined in terms of kilograms, which means currently it's defined in terms of the Planck constant. I'm not saying I don't see the difference between these definitions. The metric units definitely do feel less arbitrary than their imperial counterparts. But I hate to break it to you, literally all units are arbitrary. Unless, that is, you measure things with universal constants directly, but that tends to result in units that are nowhere near a scale that's actually practical to use. So you gotta scale them up or down to fit the size you actually need, and that's always an arbitrary decision. There is no way around this. And since all units are arbitrary, and since the two main systems that see modern use are defined with the same set of universal constants anyway, there is no reason to claim that one system is more objective than the other. More practical? Yes. More elegant? Certainly. But not more objective. But there is another thing I should address. One of the primary design principles behind the metric system is the use of consistent conversion factors across all types of unit. There is a set of prefixes you can use with whatever unit you want, all defined in nice, easy to remember decimally terms. If you're familiar with, my body of work, you might be able to predict where I'm going with this. So, hi, no, it's not objectively superior to use powers of 10 for everything, actually. I'm not going to say it was the wrong choice. There are a lot of very clear advantages, the biggest of which is if you're doing math in decimal, and almost everyone does, powers of 10 are super convenient to work with. It makes perfect sense, and I think it was completely justified.
It makes everything, I feel like it makes like math look a lot cleaner and like easier to like look at and to like to explain. It makes it simpler to explain. That's what I'm trying to say.
However, there are also some disadvantages to the way the metric prefixes work. The most obvious one, I think, is that 10 isn't actually a very nice number. This isn't really a problem with the metric system, but rather a much broader problem with decimal notation itself, one which I've spoken about at length. It's not a problem that it would be reasonable to expect a humble measurement system to solve, so it's fine and I get it, but it's still unfortunate that, for example, none of the metric units can be evenly divided into thirds. And this is one of the best things, by which I mean one of the very few good things about the imperial units. The conversion factors in the imperial system, by which I mean the ones that were intentionally put into it and not just artifacts from disconnected units being thrown together, strike a balance between numbers that are convenient to deal with and units that are convenient sizes. Because yeah, it's nice that there are 12 inches in a foot, and it's also nice that there are 16 ounces in a pound. It would definitely be improved if this was more consistent, but the way it works is like, fine. What else did I want to say? Let me check my notes here. Oh right, I almost forgot to talk about Fahrenheit. While internet arguments about different systems of measurement are pretty intense in general, the discussion around units of temperature in particular always tends to get pretty heated. Well, that is not funny at all. I don't think
that is a pun, but it was a pun that probably not a lot of people caught the first. I feel like it was a pun that not a lot of people caught the first time, but you know, it was a pun. It was a pun. It was there. You know, you had to do it.
think there's anything wrong with Fahrenheit. Its creator, Dan Fahrenheit, was, among other things, a thermometer manufacturer, and the Fahrenheit scale was designed specifically for his thermometers. You can read about the history of the scale on Wikipedia, I'm not going to get into it, but the point is, like everything about the units the United States stubbornly refuses to stop using, the Fahrenheit scale isn't quite as arbitrary as you might have been led to believe. Some of the arguments people make in favor of Fahrenheit are so common that I got people preemptively responding to them back when I first announced this video, so I won't go super deep into it. I'm sure there's a very nuanced and respectful discussion.
I remember seeing, I think, yeah, when I went to Canada, like we would turn on the news, like on the TV, when I was there, when I was like a kid, it would just be, like it was Fahrenheit and Celsius. They would show like both of those temperatures, like there, like when I was a kid. And this is like, I would say like the early 2000s, so like 2008, something like that. But yeah, I remember that like a lot, and I was like, okay, like, you know, it kind of makes it easier for like people from America coming to like Canada and stuff like that to like know what the temperature is.
Discussion going on in the comments if you're interested in hearing more. But for the sake of chaos, here's something to note. Despite what literally everyone says all the time about it, the Celsius scale is not defined with 0 degrees set to the freezing point of water and 100 degrees set to the boiling point of water. While that was the original definition, the actual 2 points used to define Celsius are absolute 0, set to negative 273.15 degrees, and a triple point of water, set to 1/100th of a degree. That is until 2019 when it was redefined in terms of the Boltzmann constant, but still, the boiling point of water at 1 standard atmosphere is about 99.984 degrees Celsius. It's close to 100 degrees, but not exactly. Okay, I'm gonna start wrapping up here. There's definitely a lot more stuff I could have said here, but I didn't want to spend too long in this video because of circumstances. Don't worry, I can explain those at a future point. One big thing is there are a lot of traditional systems of measurement around the world. They're pretty cool, and I also don't feel informed enough to say anything else about them. I'll leave a couple links in the description as jumping off points if you want to read about this stuff though. Anyway, right, time to summarize. The metric system is good in ways that are very obvious that everyone already talks about all the time. The imperial measurement system is very complicated, but that's because it's not really a single system of measurement at all. It's actually a large group of disconnected sets of units that all coexist. Additionally, by looking at any list or diagram of different units, you might get a false impression of how complex the system really is in practice, because there are a lot of units that technically exist, but are very rarely used. The original definitions of imperial units were super arbitrary, but the same thing can be said of metric, and since imperial units are all defined in terms of metric now anyway, this is kinda irrelevant. The way metric uses a consistent set of power of 10 prefixes to generate units of different sizes is very nice, but it unfortunately inherits the problems of decimal itself, which is completely fine and not even remotely worth complaining about. Imperial units avoid those specific problems, but only sometimes, and at the cost of not being internally consistent. Generally, the imperial measurement system is not very good, and the metric system is a lot better, but I still think the problems that imperial units have are often exaggerated, which is weird, because you don't have to do that, it's already obviously bad. I've been Jan Misali, and no, seriously, have you seen the units of mass they use in the UK? Like, here in the US, we just use ounces and pounds and tons.
That's what I was like, in different countries like that, say that they use, like, the imperial system, they don't really use it, not the imperial, like, they said that they use the metric system, they don't technically use it all the way, they just use it enough to say that they do, because they still use some, measurements that are imperial, which is kind of funny.
What are all of these? What the heck is a stone? Why is a hundredweight 112 pounds? What's going on?
I forgot, that's actually something too that they use a lot. But yeah, so that was the video. Thank you guys for watching that one with me. And yeah, this was recommended to me by a subscriber, so you can recommend me videos in the comment section down below. And yeah, talk to you guys in the next video. And yeah, peace.